Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live in the studio with me today, I have Shea McCort. Shea is a pilot for international shipping giant FedEx, and he's actually based out of Hong Kong. Shea, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, this is really exciting. I mentioned before we got started, in particular, I'm really interested to learn more about your career path and also about moving internationally because you're actually originally from Memphis. Is that right?
That's correct. Born and raised.
Yeah. So you're back, I guess, visiting your family?
Visiting family and friends. I get a chance to come back a couple times a year, so it's been really nice as far as working with FedEx. So they're really good about getting time off and understanding you have friends and family back at home. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited because I do get a lot of people who talk to me about, gosh, I wish I could be a pilot or I wish I could move abroad. And I think this will provide them some information.
Sure.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you tell me a little bit about what a FedEx pilot does? I think it's a little different than another kind of pilot.
Generally speaking, the pilot at FedEx is, career and responsibilities are not much different from one for like a major airline, say Delta, United, or any major airline carrier. But the only difference is that we have at FedEx is we're strictly cargo, where your major carriers are passengers and a little bit of cargo. But the different nuances as well is mainly that we work in the middle of the night because all the freight comes in during the day and then we ship it during the night, obviously moving it from one city to the next. So you do work on the backside of the clock, and that can be a little bit challenging in your day-to-day routine. So when you're on your days off, you're trying to be awake during the day after having worked and being awake at night. So that is one of the challenges at FedEx, but it's actually really great. I mean, I love the diversity of an up and down schedule like that.
So how long have you been at FedEx?
I've been with FedEx now for a little over 3 years, about 3.5.
3.5. And did you start in Memphis and then you transferred?
I started in Memphis originally. I was here with FedEx for 6 months, and then I moved to Hong Kong.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that kind of your plan, or how did that happen?
I knew that Hong Kong was an opportunity when I got hired with FedEx, and it just so happened that it did open up within a couple months of me being there. And once I went through the training, basically they said, okay, yeah, we have an opening there in Hong Kong. And I was like, why not? Let's do it. So I went over there, and it's been quite an adventure. Yeah, it's been really, really good. I mean, I've grown in so many different ways, not only as my career, but like personally as well. The challenges that, living in a city that you're unfamiliar with, having grown up in Memphis. So it is definitely one of those things that it's good to challenge yourself in that way.
No, absolutely. So what were you doing before you were at FedEx?
Prior to FedEx, I was working for another airline, which was a regional carrier for Delta, which is Pinnacle Airlines, which is now, I think, called Endeavor.
Okay.
But they were just the small regional jets that ran up and down the eastern seaboard, and they had a couple different bases in Detroit and Memphis and New York. But I worked for them for 8 years, so it was really nice to be able to still live in Memphis and work for a company here as well.
For how long?
8 years.
Oh, wow. I never realized that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So I assume with Pinnacle, the sleeping schedule was really different than now.
It is. Actually, they pretty much had the same routine. It was a lot of work there as well. It was, you're working during the day, but you were working a lot more, I'd say. But you didn't have the dynamics of, international like we do at FedEx. So there was different challenges at Pinnacle and new challenges at FedEx as well.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
So did you plan when you went to work for Pinnacle that eventually you would go to FedEx, or did you kind of figure that out along the way?
No, actually, that was kind of one of my goals prior to actually getting into aviation. Being from the Memphis area and getting into aviation in college, I realized that FedEx was a really good company, and I really wanted to work for them. So keeping them as a goal, but always keeping myself open for different opportunities. That was probably, it just worked out, and it was good timing and knowing the right people and able to get an interview and get the job, and so it worked out really well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really interested in this because I've known a number of people who've been very have admired your career, and so I think the traditional path that I've always heard of a lot of times is that people go through the military and then they become pilots. That's at least the sort of anecdotal thing that people talk about. But I don't think that was your path.
No, it's not necessarily untraditional. I think at FedEx, and I can't really say the percentage-wise, but we do have a large majority of our pilots are ex-military, and they had a full career with either the Navy, Air Force, Army, and Marines. And so when they finish and they retire, they're actually coming out with a lot of quality time in aviation, and then they're looking for a job. And with networking, they find that a lot of our guys are at FedEx, or a lot of ex-military at FedEx, so they get in and they start working for the company. So actually, a lot of people I fly with are ex-military, which is pretty interesting because you've got somebody like myself who's all civilian background. They don't know much about the civilian world as far as aviation, only in their career in FedEx. And then I get to talk to these guys that have flown like F-16s, and they're landing on aircraft carriers, and they're doing all these different missions. So you get quite a diverse background with people you fly with.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So how did you get into aviation? Like, since you didn't go the military route, like, how did it happen?
Well, I was in college and I was flying just kind of as a hobby, and I'd already declared a major, but I was just doing it on the side and wasn't 100% sure that, aviation was the career path that I wanted to take. But after doing it and kind of looking at it and talking to different people and getting the idea of what kind of lifestyle it was and, what kind of work went into it, I decided after college that aviation was going to be my career path.
So what did you study in college?
Funny enough, I actually have a degree in film and video production.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So,
yeah,
so
because you're really creative.
Yeah, it was good, though, because I'd already declared that major, and I didn't want to change my major towards aviation. And there's nothing that's in aviation. They'd like for you to be diverse and have a degree, especially along with a lot of the major carriers. But so since I'd already declared a major instead of switching it to aviation, I didn't find it advantageous to change it, because it would have probably delayed my graduation time by a year. Mm-hmm. So I ended up finishing up my degree with film and then go right on to flight school afterwards, which was down in Fort Lauderdale. And that was like a really concentrated flight school where I was flying about 7 days a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So then while you were in college and you were taking flight classes, I assume those weren't through the college.
They were not. There are schools that are out there, like MTSU here in Tennessee, and there's Embry-Riddle that you can get a 4-year degree along with your aviation. Mm-hmm. And I recommend if you like the aviation side and the aviation business management side, mm-hmm. then to look into that type of career as well as far as a degree. But, I mean, if you are interested in flying, but you would like to have some sort of a backup if aviation comes down the road that's not really for you, mm-hmm. at least you'll have something to fall back on. And that's why I did kind of a diverse background with the film and video production. But luckily, I'm still doing the aviation thing, but if it doesn't work out at some point, maybe I'll go back to film.
No, I like that because, I talk to people often, especially people who have children, and mm-hmm. they get really upset that their child can't decide what they want to be. And I even heard from someone this week that said this person had stopped paying for their child's college because they said, until you figure out your major, you're not going forward. Mm. And I was like, wait a minute, it's way more important that you graduate college than what your degree is in.
I agree, yeah. I've talked to so many people, especially in Hong Kong. I mean, you get such a diverse and different cultures, and it's amazing to hear. I was like, oh, what'd you study in college? And they'll say, X, and then but you're doing Z. And you're like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear like how people have gone from what they've studied in college and where they're at today, and kind of mm-hmm. how they got to that point. So I think it's good to have just a degree to kind of get the ball rolling, and it provides a structure as far as like how I don't know, to maybe how to study and how to be disciplined and be diverse in different business aspects.
Yeah, I feel like it teaches you how to be an adult.
I agree. Yeah, in better terms than what I just said. Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Yeah,
Makes you grow up for sure.
So you went to Florida to actually go to flight school.
I did. Mm-hmm.
And did you just apply? Like, how did that happen?
Well, being that I already had so there's different certificates along with aviation on the civilian side. You can start off as a private pilot, and then you can get an instrument rating, and then you can get a commercial rating, and then you can become an instructor. And that's usually a typical path that you take with the civilian side of aviation in the career path for becoming an airline pilot, or a commercial, basically just a commercial pilot. So I wanted to fully focus on, flying and just treat it like school. So when I went down to this school or academy, which was called Gulfstream Academy in Fort Lauderdale, it was like basically going to school, like in college, but it was just solely focused on aviation and flying and studying. But there was no, if it's not an accredited college, but it gets you the certificates that you need to advance your career.
Okay, and how long does that kind of school take?
It really depends on how much free time that you have. Luckily enough, I've devoted all my free time to flying. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people may not have that flexibility. Mm-hmm. So it can take you, if you're flying, every day, you can get it done quite quickly. But they're long days, and it's completely focused on there. I think when it was all said and done, by the time I got my commercial license, was about 4 to 5 months, or about 4 to 6 months.
Super quick.
It is quick, yeah, but it's an intense 6 months.
So when you graduated, did you get a job right away? Like, what happens?
Not exactly. Typically what happens, and mine's a little bit on the untraditional part right here, is a lot of people usually what they'll do is they'll become an instructor.
Okay.
And then they'll have to build the time as an instructor. And it's great because it teaches you responsibility and you're teaching what you just learned, so it's all fresh in your mind as well. And that's how you build your time, because a lot of these airlines, either regional airlines or corporate side of aviation, they would like, for insurance policies, they'd like to have for you to have X amount of hours. Now it's different with each company, but I was lucky enough. I found an airline down in Fort Lauderdale and also in Key West that was part of Continental Connection, and I did like a paid internship. So I actually paid them, but they paid me as well.
Okay.
And so I was able to get the experience of a regional airline in the right seat as a first officer, flying a Beech 1900, which is a 19-passenger propeller plane. And we flew in and out of, I was based in Key West, and so we would fly in and out of Fort Lauderdale and Miami and throughout the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And so, it was a massive learning curve, especially coming out of, only having about 250 hours of total time in an airplane and then jumping into a, high-performance complex jet. Well, not jet, but a turboprop airplane and flying passengers and doing 5 and 6 legs a day. So it was a quick learning curve, but, it was definitely a huge advantage because, it was... From the get-go, that's how I've learned is airline training.
Yeah.
So it was really, really good.
How did you find that position?
It was actually kind of incorporated with the school that I went to.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it was, you finished up, or you could do the kind of the flight instructing path, or you could take this path and do the 121. The 121 is usually, I use that, it's a term for the FAA, the type of flying, like Delta and United and Pinnacle and FedEx are all under this 121 certificate with the FAA.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So are most of the people that go through flight school, are they relatively young in general?
Not always, because I flew with a lot of people in flight school that were maybe starting a second career. So it's not always... it's good to start off with maybe when you're young, but it's not definitely out of the cards if you are a little bit older and you want to start a second career. The only thing is there is a time limit because you can only work to your 65
Oh,
for
really?
for a 121 carrier like FedEx or Delta or United. And that's just recently changed probably in the last 10 years. But it was 60, now it's 65. And who knows it may change again to 70. So with that being said, our position with major airlines, usually when you get hired, you work your way up in seniority, and it's just kind of the quality of life, and your schedules get better as you are longer with longevity with the company.
Yeah.
So if you only have, say for me, I've got a potentially a 30-year career with FedEx.
Right.
And then somebody who's coming in at a later stage in life may only have like a 15-year career with them.
Oh, interesting. Gosh, that's a tough choice, I guess, as you get older.
Yeah, as you get older, but that's not the reason why you get into it. I mean,
Right.
you do it for the love of aviation, and that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you've been in Hong Kong for
Just 3 years, yeah.
Okay. And I actually visited you in Hong
You
Kong.
did,
I
yeah.
was on a trip and I stopped by, and it was great. I met a ton of other FedEx pilots who were also there, and just a lot of people from a lot of different places. Have you been, I mean, what made you decide Hong Kong? You said you knew there was an opportunity, but I mean, were you always open to moving abroad, or was it kind of what got you interested?
What got me interested in Asia, because I hadn't spent too much time in Asia prior to being offered that position.
Right.
I did a little bit of Europe, just traveling on my own and going to university for a short period of time with a study abroad. But I didn't know much about Asia, and kind of that thirst for discovering different parts of the world and being challenged in the aviation side of flying that side of the world. I figured it was a great opportunity. So it was more of a why than why not.
Right.
It was more of a why not than why, I should say.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean,
so it was
yeah.
really good. And being there in Hong Kong is such a great jumping off point to visit different countries, not only with work, but also in your free time. I mean, because it's really centrally located, and I would say a vast majority of like flights that people are going to other destinations, whether it be like Thailand or Vietnam or the Philippines, they usually will come through Hong Kong. So it's a good kind of central location to be to discover all different parts of Asia.
Oh, so you've probably gotten to travel around quite a bit.
I have, yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's
in
really
fact,
good.
this month I went to Cambodia on some free time.
Wow.
Yeah.
How was that?
That was fantastic. It's probably the second time I've been there, and it just keeps getting better. Just
cool.
discovering new things. So, yeah.
That's excellent. So I work with a lot of clients who it's kind of like their lifelong dream to move abroad, and it terrifies them. Is there anything that you wish you had known before you moved, or, what would you say to someone that's really scared to move somewhere but really wants to?
You definitely need to do your homework for sure. I mean, there's things that, like, you got to basically it's a mindset as well. I mean, just keeping an open mind. And I actually highly recommend maybe start thinking about a minimalist lifestyle, not to an extreme, obviously, but start looking at things that you maybe don't use on a daily basis, and can I live without that? Because it definitely makes moving and abroad a lot easier. Like, I didn't bring much stuff with me over to Hong Kong, and I still feel like, looking back on it, I wish I'd brought less.
How much did you bring?
I think when it was all said and done, it was like somewhere maybe about 300 pounds worth of stuff. And it was like, some kitchen stuff, a computer, and a lot of it was clothes. And I just realized I don't need as much clothes as I think, So I think that basically having a mindset of also, minimalist, but expect maybe the unexpected in a way. That way it leaves you with different opportunities that may come abroad, come your way.
So speaking of a minimalist lifestyle, how big is your apartment, like roughly?
I've lived now in 2 different apartments.
Okay.
Yeah, so you visited the one apartment, and it's pretty small. Now, for Hong Kong standards, it's about right. So for a studio apartment, it was about 375 square feet. Now, I was lucky enough, I had like a small little deck off the back of my studio. But on average, that's what people live in.
Do you remember how big your place was in Memphis before you moved?
I've lived in a couple different places, but I mean, I can't remember ever living anything that was like under 1,000 square feet. So like going, 3/4 less than what you ever had you're like, oh my goodness. Yeah. So it was definitely, that was something I don't think you can plan, even if you can say, well, yeah, I'm expecting to live in smaller. It's not until you actually live in those smaller quarters. But the good thing is you find yourself not really at home a lot because it's such an energetic city and it's such a social city as well. I mean, there's always restaurants and there's always something going on, new restaurants popping up, new bars, and there's quite a scene. Whether it's it's Monday through Sunday. I mean, there's always something going on. So really, you don't find yourself in your apartment too much.
So one thing people sometimes get really nervous about when it comes to moving is like making new friends and meeting new people. Because usually as you're growing up, like you make friends in college, they're kind of given to you, same thing in high school. And here as an adult to relocate to like a whole different country.
Right.
And to have to meet new people, it seems really tough. Like, did you find that to be the case or?
No, in fact, actually, that was probably one of the things that I didn't expect, and I found it to be quite exciting too. Because once I was over there, people were actually really quite friendly to speak to. I mean, it didn't matter what the subject topic was, or whether you were a financial or person, or you were a lawyer, or an aviation. So people are actually quite open to meet new people there as well, because I think mainly is because we all share that common denominator, because there's quite a bit of different expats there. When I say expats, expatriates from the different countries. We've got quite a bit of Europeans, British, and we've got Australians and people from the Philippines and from Japan. So really, it's quite interesting that, we all have that common denominator. This isn't our home, and we want to experience this new lifestyle in a very diverse place. So I think that makes everybody kind of want to reach out a little bit more and be a little bit more sociable.
I remember it kind of felt a little bit like a small town.
Yeah.
Like it felt like, a lot of the people that you knew each other.
Right,
and it was all like this big group of friends. Like it was really interesting to see that in such a big city.
Yeah, it's funny enough, having traveled over the years, even, with work and leisure time, the world is pretty big, but it keeps getting smaller because it's amazing on how many different degrees. Like you'll bump into somebody that knows a friend, and it's not even work related. It's
Yeah.
You're like, oh, like you said, you'd ran into somebody from Memphis. We used to live in Memphis, and they lived in South Maine, which is close to where you live. So I think it's pretty interesting. Like, for instance, I was in Moree, Australia, a few weeks ago. Well, I say a few weeks ago, about a month ago. And this is a small country town. It looks something like out of Crocodile Dundee, I would imagine. And I start talking to these guys, and they're like, oh, yeah, I've been to Memphis. I went to University of Memphis. And I'm like,
what?
I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah, but apparently so Moree is actually a pretty big cotton country, and so there's a cotton school here at the University of Memphis, and a lot of these guys from Moree were coming over, and I was like, well, that's crazy. Yeah.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Yeah, the strangest things happen, I feel like, when you travel. I think it was before I came to Hong Kong, I was in Thailand, and I was in Phuket, which is a very small place, and I was in the airport, and I ran into one of my classmates who I went to graduate school with at Pepperdine. We were in the same line checking luggage.
Oh, wow.
And he was the only other person in my class who grew up in Oklahoma, which is where I grew up. And I just looked at him with this blank stare because I thought, it can't possibly be him.
Right.
I was just sort of looking at him, and he goes, yeah, it's me. And I was like, hey, it's the second time I've seen him since graduation, and both times it was in airports.
That's
so weird.
It is. That is, yeah, some small world stuff right there. But it's pretty amazing though. And the thing is, and that's one of the things I encourage people to go study abroad, because even maybe if you only make a handful of friends and you move abroad, you've just opened up so much more networking for maybe a different career path or enhancing the career that you already have. So it's quite awesome.
So in terms of, I think there are probably people that you've worked with or you've seen move abroad that they've been great at it. And there's maybe some people who moved over that it really hasn't been their thing and maybe they came back.
Yeah, I've seen both.
What are some of the traits of the people who, like, it went really well for them? What are some of the things that help them to do better?
I would say the same. I think one of the traits that, like myself and the people I work with, is it's pretty interesting because we all kind of share the same kind of outlook on, whether it be traveling either for work or, on our leisure time. It's that sense of adventure, kind of let's go see this, let's go do that. Especially even when we are at work, if we've got, some extra time off in between flights, or say we have like a 24-hour layover, usually the person I'm flying with is like, yeah, man, let's go check out this, or let's go see this kind of museum. And it's just that kind of thirst of discovering new things and seeing what the world has to offer.
That makes a lot of sense. So do you feel like for the people who, it wasn't their thing and they came back, was that kind of lacking in them? They were just not as open? No,
I don't think so. Not that they were lacking that, but maybe their enthusiasm for it wasn't as great as, say, like myself or some of the other people that we work with. But I give them credit for even just coming over and trying to experience it. And they say, at least they said they tried.
Right.
And, not that they failed by any means, but they realize that, okay, maybe I don't like it as nearly as much as I like being at home. And a lot of that time, that is one of the things that you will give up. I mean, if you could take your friends and your family with you.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That would just be ideal. But that's probably one of the, the downsides to having living abroad. You're away from, kind of probably a close network of friends, and you're not as close to your family. So it just, it's one of those things you kind of have to give up.
No, it's a good point. So how much of a time zone difference is there between like Memphis and Hong Kong?
Let's see. Right now it is 1:45 in the morning, so it's 13 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that must make it extra hard, actually, to talk with friends and family.
It does at times. You definitely, it's definitely one of those things. I've been in the middle of the day thinking, oh man, I need to call my mom, or I need to call my dad, check up on him. Oh, it's 3 in the morning. Never mind. So it's one of those things. You kind of get used to it, but you do it like maybe right before you go to bed if it's like 10 o'clock at night.
So do you talk to them on the phone or Skype, or how does that work?
Well, that was one of the things that you kind of have to figure out for yourself. There's with technology today, I think it's great, and especially with Apple's technology with FaceTime and there's Skype, that I think living abroad is much easier than it has been in the past, because you actually do have that face-to-face time with them, and there's so many different avenues of communication, whether it be Facebook or texting, and like I said, FaceTime or Skype. So although I do miss them, and you miss being around them, I feel like it does kind of fill that, not the complete void that you have, but it definitely makes things a little bit smoother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, so before we got started, we were talking for a minute about the technical difficulties that a lot of people face with a move overseas, whether it's, like with visa issues or whatever. But it sounds like in your case, it was much smoother because you were mentioning it was like it was considered an internal move. Right. So I certainly wasn't the pioneer. There's been many people prior to me, and FedEx does a fairly good job of lining up everything and trying to make the transition, because they know that whether you're single, and for me, I am single, but
they do move families over there, and we do actually have quite a bit of families that have come from the States to live in Hong Kong, and it's when you start adding extra family members, it can be kind of a logistics nightmare.
Yeah, I can see that.
Taking kids out of school and making sure that all and getting set up and everything. But they did a great job. I mean, I was offered, service department to look and kind of feel the place out before I made a decision where I wanted to live. They had a setup with a real estate kind of a relocation program over there.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, really it did help out a lot. I don't know about other companies, but I know that FedEx did a really good job as far as like setting that up.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good idea for people who are interested to move abroad but are not quite sure how to do it, is that you can look for jobs in the U.S. with U.S. companies that have positions in other countries.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's, I think, probably so much easier than trying to look for, like, say you want to go to Europe, for example. It would be much easier to find a job for a U.S. company that had a position in Europe than to try to get a job with a European company.
No, I couldn't agree with you more.
Right. So I think it's a good option, and maybe for those people who are listening that are thinking of moving abroad but are not quite sure how to do it, I think this path really works regardless of sort of which field in particular you're looking at.
Yeah, I would agree with you for the most part, because they did a lot of the legwork. I mean, as far as like moving my stuff and shipping.
Right.
Even though working for a shipping company.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. But no, but if you want to look for a job abroad, I mean, certainly don't take it off the table, but you're going to just keep in mind that there's going to be a lot more legwork to do if you're not moving internally from, the same company to, a position within the same company, whether it be Europe or outside of the United States. But I don't discourage anybody to not look for jobs in other companies outside, because it's, like I said, it's challenging, not only with work and communication, but it's very rewarding as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the thing that's really interesting about your career that I think I've taken away, and I hope other people listening are taking away, is you've really been kind of like what I would consider the CEO of your own career. Like
Yeah, I guess so.
You didn't sit back and wait. You went to college, you studied film, and you didn't just wait for a film job to show up.
Right.
You said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pursue this other thing. You moved yourself to Florida, and you made some really deliberate choices. And I just don't picture you as someone who kind of sits back and waits to see what's going to happen next.
No, it's definitely one of those things where you keep yourself open and and allow different opportunities to come your way, but certainly still keep pressing forward and keep yourself focused on whether it be a certain goal, but obviously allowing yourself the opportunity for different goals if they do come along. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it often sort of makes a difference between someone having a really successful career and just kind of a career they're not very satisfied with, is that someone who is very internally driven and makes their own choices. So I think that's a really great, example. Well, this has been super helpful. We've covered so many topics. I don't know. Is there any other advice that you'd like to share?
I can't think of anything. I think we hit up quite a bit. But by all means, if something comes up and one of your listeners has a question that maybe you can't answer, that you feel like I could probably answer, by all means, get in contact with me, or I can leave my email for your listeners if they want to get a hold of me directly, if they're more interested in kind of just whether it be Hong Kong or FedEx or aviation in general. I'm happy to answer any questions or give any sort of advice if I can.
That's great. So what did you say that the school was called in Florida that you went to?
Gulfstream Academy.
Gulfstream Academy.
But they're no longer...
Oh, they're not around?
No, they're not around anymore. It's one of those things with flight schools, they kind of come and go. There are still those type of flight schools out there.
Okay.
It's just a matter of time. That was what seemed to fit me best and, cost point as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for anybody who's listening, if you'd like to learn more about FedEx, go to fedex.com. And if you would like to get in touch with Shea, definitely reach out to me, and I would be happy to put you in touch. So thank you, Shea, for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah, it was a good conversation.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher to ensure you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.